morning. Welcome. Thank you, everyone, for getting back through the snow and the turkey and everything else. On this Monday morning after the holiday, we're thrilled to have you here. My name is Sasha O'Connell. I'm here on behalf of both the School of Public Affairs at American and Guidehouse to welcome you. I am currently an executive in residence at SPA, and just a quick note, you're sitting in the law school at American. The School of Public Affairs is just down the road. A dedicated school dedicated to public service. I have the honor and privilege of teaching now both in the undergrad and grad program, and it is really inspiring. I was just telling some of our panelists, to me, our students who come through who want to work in government and in national security in particular. It's a thrill. And so this conversation, this dialogue, this convening is right in the mission set at the School of Public Affairs. And we're thrilled to have everyone here again Monday morning after the holiday. So thanks again so much for coming. Before we get to the panel, I wanted to introduce John Saad, sector leader for the national security sector at Guidehouse. We've had a great partnership between AU and Guidehouse going on just about a year now. One more plug before I turn it over to John. In association with this panel series, this convening series, we also have a podcast. And if you haven't checked it out, I highly encourage you to. It's called Mission is Possible. We just released our 3rd episode last week, and it's focused on management issues specific to the national security sector. So we'll be doing an episode on this session as well. So again, if you haven't downloaded it, Mission is Possible. We'd love to have you give it a listen. So with that, Mr. Saad, to you. You bet.
Good morning, everyone. What a great turnout for the Monday after Thanksgiving. So thank you all for being here. I know, like many others, I'm still waking up and reorienting myself to the work week. We're really thrilled to be presenting this panel on the unique roles of the CFO in the national security space. Guidehouse has had the privilege of serving a number of CFOs in support of their mission over a number of years, and we found that there's unique focus areas that we would like to talk about today. So we've put together a fantastic panel. It'll be moderated by one of our lead financial management experts at Guidehouse, Rubel Basha. So we're looking forward to having her up here. This is our 5th session with the School of Public Affairs at AU, and we're thrilled that we're continuing this partnership into next year. So please look out for more programming as we go forward. But without further ado, I'm going to bring Ruba up to introduce our panelists and to go into some discussion that I think many of you are interested in hearing. So thanks for being here today.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming and welcome back from Thanksgiving. I'll start off with some quick introductions. You guys should have all received bios last night by email for all of our panelists, but we'll let them do some quick introductions and then we'll go right into the discussion. Today we're here to talk about how the finance function of a government organization enables mission operations and that critical role that they play within the national security arena. So our panelists that we have today are Mr. Trey Treadwell, the Assistant Director of National Intelligence and the Intelligence Community CFO. Mr. Jeffrey Sillett, the Associate Executive Assistant Director for Finance and Facilities Division of the FBI. And Mr. Sam Grable, the Acting Deputy Executive Assistant Commissioner of Enterprise Services and the CFO of CBP. So we'll let each panelist introduce themselves briefly and then we'll go right into the discussion. Trey?
Thank you. I'll try to keep it brief because it's much more interesting to hear what some of my colleagues are dealing with than talk about myself. But just a little quick background and kind of how I ended up here. Started off active duty Air Force for 11 years, graduated from the Air Force Academy. Spent all of that time in both space operations and acquisition. And I was at a job when I worked in Denver, and one of my bosses at the time, he was quoting a former director of the NRO when he said this, and he said, Jimmy Hill was who he was quoting. I can't cite that specifically, I never have it written down, but I use it a lot, so I'm sticking with it. But the quote was, there are 2 kinds of decisions, those that involve money and those that don't matter. And we were impacting a lot of things in the budget domain and trying to operationalize the system and capability, and we were going through a reduction in what our top line budget authority was. And as we were trying to make trades, it kind of came down to a lot of those things, and we'll get into that a little bit later in terms of mission operations and capability versus how we're going to allocate limited resources. And when he said that to me, one, it was kind of funny and cute at the same time because we were dealing with money, but we were also dealing with operations and capabilities. And it really stuck with me. And then through my career, the rest of my Air Force career, which I had about 5 years after that, I watched very deft and experienced program managers and resource managers be able to accomplish and enable great things through the smart allocation of resources. And on the budget front, the budget domain, that really stuck with me in terms of how we can make operations better and improve ourselves through the smart application of resources. And so we've sort of expanded that statement into, there are two kinds of decisions, those that involve resources and those that don't matter. And I expand the resources piece into human capital as well as space and facilities and other things beyond just money. After 11 years of active duty, spent a couple years in the private sector, started out with PwC. I can't remember what we called it then, but it was Washington Federal Practice at the time, thank you. And then spent a little over a year with PwC, moved to General Dynamics to be a program manager, and then came back to the government when I saw an opportunity to work on the resource side within the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. And since then, I've spent 3 years at ODNI in the CFO's office, a year at Office of Management and Budget doing White House budget allocation and oversight of national security space programs to include the NRO. And then 4.5 years at NRO being the Deputy Chief Financial Officer, overseeing largely the 4 consecutive clean audits while I was there. They've now achieved their 11th consecutive clean audit. And then back to ODNI a little over a year and a half ago to be, run the transition into the transformation or the reorganization that ODNI did. And then finally, last little over a year now as the Intelligence Community Chief Financial Officer.
Great, thank you. Jeff, would you please introduce yourself?
Morning, how y'all doing?
Good morning.
It is a beautiful Monday morning. I was just describing how my flight from Chicago last night was supposed to take off at 9, and it was taking off at 11:30, so I'm working on 0 sleep. I am a Bostonian, so I will be drinking lots of Dunkin' Donuts coffee. I have a little bit different of a career path to getting to the CFO position. I've been in the CFO position for the past approximately 2.5 months. Before that, I spent 23 years in various positions throughout the FBI. Before coming into the FBI, I worked for Ernst & Young and Arthur Andersen. Yes, we put one of my companies out of business. That was after I was already here. And I was just saying earlier that I've never hid my accounting degree, which is clearly was a mistake. I'm kidding, because now I'm back here in a financial position. I'm really actually thrilled to be here. My first office of assignment from the FBI was New York City, so I've served in New York City, FBI headquarters 3 times. I was in the Boston division, Providence, Rhode Island for 5 years, Boston for 2, New Orleans and Chicago, and just got here. And throughout my career, I've used forensic accounting to combat different continuing criminal enterprises and counterterrorism. So we're at a national security conference. I think something that I talk about and am very passionate about is mass acts of violence, detecting, deterring, preventing, investigating, and mitigating those acts of violence, which is a major responsibility now for the law enforcement and intelligence community. And I really, my career has been shaped by the events of 9/11. I was next to the North Tower when the South Tower fell in 2001. And that's the epitome of failure. It's a failure to communicate, it's a failure to collaborate, and it's a failure of transparency. And it's something that we in law enforcement and intelligence have worked very hard. As Trey sits next to me, the ODNI is a product of 9/11. And for those of you, I always recommend this to younger folks that may not have had the opportunity. Read the cliff notes of the 9/11 Commission report if you want to understand what your government looks like today versus what your government looked like in 2001, because it is a substantially different government, I think, for the better. One of the things I talk about when we talk about mass acts of violence and counterterrorism, we're really good at counterterrorism right now. And when I say that, I mean pushing the idea we need more money. It's, we are going to tell you all the things that we're doing and being good stewards of our money, because I think when we're talking about it, Trey said that as well, which is really our job as government officials is not only to manage our assets, but to be good stewards of it for the American public and to make sure the American public is getting everything they can out of our organizations based on how much we are getting for funding. So I think that's a critical piece to me from being an operations guy for 23 years, although I will say, I will pull this out, I keep my creds in my pocket, and the only thing I keep in here besides my business cards is my current Massachusetts CPA license. So I want you to know that in addition to the badge, I have a CPA license in here. So I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Jeff, for that. Sam, would you please introduce yourself?
You bet. Well, good morning, everybody. I guess I didn't get the big gulp. So my name's Sam. I live here. I live in Virginia. I've got 3 kids, 2 in college, and 1 is an 8th grader. Those are the folks I really focus on. I got here through luck and timing, basically. Air Force guy, you can see it in the bio. It's a real privilege to be representing the 350 or so Office of Finance professionals at CBP, as well as 60,000 CBP individuals. It is the nation's the nation's largest law enforcement agency. It's, like I said, 60,000 people. We also have an important mission in terms of revenue collection. We have the second largest, we collect the second largest revenue in the nation behind the IRS. In fact, last year collected about $84 billion, and that's moving upward toward probably $100 billion this year. That's because of all the trade remedies that the president and others have been instituting. So it's a remarkably dynamic mission. It's an important mission. It's one I'm very privileged to have the opportunity to represent. Happy to take your questions.
Great, thank you so much. I think those introductions really gave us some good context around the types of environments that these CFOs play in. So the first thing we'd like to talk about is how being a CFO in the national security arena is unique. Troy, would you like to start?
Thank you. There's a couple of unique things from my experience that I'll share with you, and I'll go back to my time as the Deputy CFO at NRO first, and then talk about the current role as the Intelligence Community CFO. From an accounting and finance and resource allocation, you're charged with an incredible amount of responsibility in terms of the amount of resources that you're managing and trying to direct, and especially within NRO, who is one of the top 2 or 3 resource organizations within the intelligence community. There is a significant amount of transactions that occur on a daily basis that you have oversight responsibility and accounting responsibility for. And as the first intelligence community agency to have a clean audit opinion, maintaining that was very critical to our director. In that front, though, or on that front, it was made possible initially by a lot of what they would call brute force or forensic accounting, and kind of going back into historical research on how things were accounted for, how they were put, a lot of voucher entries, adjusting and making corrections to how things were accomplished. At the end of the day, though, where they're moving after 11 years of consecutive unmodified opinions now, trying to move into that controls-based audit to where you have better processes in place, and you can just modify, or you can just review the controls. On that front is from a national security, where we differ significantly is while we do have a annual financial report and a statement that we put out, it's never made public. You know, it has to go and be integrated, and within the intelligence community, the CIA and the ODNI are the only real independent agencies, and all the other the 17 elements report up through parent departments and agencies, and the National Intelligence Program resources are often mixed with their parent department resources, and so how you account for intelligence program funding as classified, unclassified funding from your parent departments or agencies in a different way creates a lot of accounting nuances that we have to make amends for in terms of reporting information. accounting side of it and the transparency of it is critical. It gives us a lot of credibility with our oversight in Congress as well as White House and our constituents that we have in those. But oftentimes it is a very significant challenge to get our operators and program managers and those that are actually spending the money for their mission to really buy into the utility of going through all these accounting processes. I can't speak to my new friend, brand new best friends agencies and their perspectives on what sort of controls or challenges they have with individuals, but I will say both largely across the intelligence community, especially with those agencies that don't have these unmodified opinions, they see very little utility in it directly. And what we try to emphasize to them is that at the end of the day, the credibility that we get and the ability to tell our oversight and tell our taxpayers that we are being good stewards of the resources is a critical element of being a good steward of those, and being able to account for the fact that we're not buying $400 toilet seats or $800 hammers, and that we can talk to the value that we actually get for the dollars. I would tell you that really handling things on the resource front is much more exciting. We talked about how great we are being a counterterrorism organization. The intelligence community has evolved to that over the past 18 years now, and being a very effective counterterrorism set of organizations. Where we're really struggling, where we're really challenged, is to migrate our resource management approach, though, away from CT as being our primary challenge and threat and focus to where it is against great power competition and the national security strategy that the president has put out. And in that front, we as resource managers and when we make decisions on how to allocate the limited budget and resources we have, struggle with how do we take risk in those areas. And I would tell you that certainly across the intelligence community as a whole, we're not as data-driven as we need to be. So we make a lot of decisions based upon experience and instinct and the things that we, with significant amounts of experience, do know to be good decisions, but substantiating those or allocating specific elements of that without the specific data is challenging. And as I started to be in this position and engage with the private sector on how they make decisions, and CFOs and private and public companies do, they are not solely, but so much more significantly dependent upon data to inform those decisions, such that oftentimes I was talking to a company recently where they said they actually force the people to come out of the process and only let the machines allocate resources in certain areas. So the challenge that we have within the national security sector or even the public sector is how much we're taking advantage of the data that's available to us. And I would tell you that my goal is to turn the intelligence analysis capabilities that we have against our foreign adversaries inward-looking, to look at the data that we have direct access to ourselves, and focus our analysis and resource management processes on providing those of us at the table and our senior leaders sort of insight that we would provide them in terms of intelligence if we had that sort of insight and access to a foreign adversary and how they're applying their resources, so that we can know what to go after and hopefully we can apply our resources a little better.
Great. Jeff, could you comment on how being the CFO is unique, considering in particular the unpredictable and evolving nature?
So the FBI is an intelligence agency, it's a law enforcement agency, and it's a national security agency. So we have multi-prongs of what we are responsible for. Trey was talking about data-driven. I couldn't agree more. The FBI actually is a very data-driven organization. We have what's called our threat resource prioritization process. So the Bureau has been evolving over the past 15 years as our budget has increased. Our responsibilities have increased, but if everything is a priority, then nothing's a priority. also have a massive potential counterterrorism threat to the city of Chicago. We also have a massive counterintelligence threat because the Chinese consulate happens to be in Chicago, right? So with all of these things, and we have a huge economic base, where do you put your resources? Well, the answer is everywhere. Where you specifically put them, you're allocating based on the intelligence and the information you have and the threats. Could I put 500 people working gangs? Absolutely. Could I put 500 people working violent crimes against children? Absolutely. But that's not the only places that we need to put our resources. We need to keep America safe from both threats, domestic and international, and we need to keep America safe locally, regionally, and nationally, which is our responsibility to do. Another thing Trey addressed, which I also couldn't agree with more, is we are really good at counterterrorism, but counterterrorism has evolved into the space of mass acts of violence. We also have a huge counterintelligence threat and a cyber threat that's facing this country right now. I gave a speech at Langley about 3 months ago, and I'm going to say the same thing to all of you. We have missed the CI 9/11, and we are getting our heads handed to us, which is the nicest way that I can put this. China is on a 5, 10, 20, 50, and 500-year plan, and we are on a 2, 4, and 6-year plan based on election cycles in this country. China is kicking our butts when it comes to their overall strategy on attacking America, and they're not looking to destabilize America. They're not looking to destabilize the world. They just want to be the dominant power in the world that we sit in today. So what do? We still need to keep our finger on terrorism because, and I worked with the mob for 15 years of my career, if you do not keep your finger on a threat, they will multiply and come back, meaning that we need to have a robust counterterrorism apparatus in this country. But we also need to be pivoting resources towards the counterintelligence threat, which is something that is nebulous. So what I would say to you is it's really easy to say, oh my God, somebody just drove a car into 15 students at a college, right? And that gives people real impact. To talk about the impact that CI has, it's not that fast. It takes time, meaning it's not as sexy, which is one of those things that we got to do a better job when we're managing our assets and resources. So what's unique about my job, I guess, or our jobs, we don't just have asset management, we have threat management. So when you're dealing with what we deal with, we're dealing with real threats all day, every day, and behind the money and the numbers is actual potential loss of lives, loss of national security, loss of technology, and loss of, ultimately, potentially the greatest asset we have, freedom.
Great.
Jeff's doing pretty good for no sleep. I'd just add, if I could, maybe just a couple things. One is, to the last point, it is national security. So for me as a CFO, as a pencil net comptroller, when I go to the Valor Memorial Ceremony, which is held every year, and I see the individuals, the names of the individuals who have lost their lives in support of the U.S. Customs and Border Protection mission, that brings it back, right? So that's something that's different from being CFO for a commercial organization. It's just the nature of it, the security nature of it. The second thing that strikes me about it, and these may not be necessarily be solely security elements, but I would say in government, the debate between the legislative branch and the executive branch can have major impacts on little CFOs. And I think at CBP, I don't know if you all have been reading the news. I was glad there weren't any protests out here, but there are a lot of differences of opinion. It's a visceral environment right now when it comes to CBP that I didn't face when I was in the Air Force. Right? Everybody likes the Air Force. Everybody likes the DoD, but you have to be able to deal with external pressures and still make wise decisions based upon the best information you have. And the third thing, again, not necessarily unique to this business, but is that it's taxpayer money. I don't know how many of you have had situations where individuals get their pots of money and they sort of believe that they're theirs. And so if there's any request to actually use some of that money for another purpose internal to the organization, people seem to take that personally. The reality is, it's the taxpayers' money, it's my money, it's your money. And so I always think that that's important for us to remember when we're deciding what to do with the resources. And ultimately, we have a debt crisis in this nation, we're gonna have to deal with it at some point. And so if we keep thinking about things along a one-year appropriation cycle or a two multi-year appropriation cycle, that's not gonna get it done. We have to think more strategically in the national security environment for sure, in a number of different fronts, including how much we're going to invest in and what we invest the money, the taxpayers' hard-earned money in.
Great, thank you all so much. You all mentioned the concept of real threats and pressures behind the work that you do, and obviously there aren't unlimited resources where you have to make decisions and prioritize. Can you talk a little bit about how you balance that with actually fulfilling the job that you have as a CFO of your organization, and then in particular about the use of data? What does that look like, and how do you communicate that to enable the mission? Maybe we can start with you, Sam.
You guys covered data. I would say we're not as mature, I would say, in terms of leveraging data as I would like to be. You know, when you think about data and you think about robotics, whatever, we've got some robotics in terms of the CFO organization specifically, some RPA in progress right now to try and help machines do basic tasks that humans would normally do, and then use the human mind to do the other higher order tasks. That's certainly something that we're engaged in. I would say in terms of sort of risk balancing, I like to think about it kind of strategically and then tactically. Strategically, in terms of placing resources, I think you have to invest, right? And the investment is in people. So we have this constant pull and tug between do we invest in resources and training? Do we work to make CBP a workplace of choice? How do we do that? And how do you employ resources most effectively to do it? What y'all probably know is when you are faced with operational choices, near-term operational choices, build a wall. You have to face near-term operational choices or deal with a migration crisis coming across along the southwest border. You oftentimes short shrift some of those things that are important to you strategically. And so we have to continue to find ways to make sure that we are investing in our people, investing in the training that's requisite to build a bench, and make sure that we have people that are going to be there after I'm gone, or Jeff or Trey in their organization. So we have to be thinking more long-term than we do. I believe building coalitions is absolutely essential as we work to make risk choices. In my role, understanding what's going on the Hill is extraordinarily important. Understanding what's going on at OMB is extraordinarily important. Of course, headquarters DHS, and DHS, of course, coming out of 9/11 as well, is still a teenager. So we're working hard to make sure that we, the processes are mature, that we work together across DHS components to try to do the right thing and do it as effectively as we possibly can. And then as a CFO, it's being the sort of voice of the organization to the appropriations committees, to the OMB examiners and that hierarchy, and making sure that we get the resources that we need. And then from basically a tactical perspective, it's all of the things that you all would naturally employ. It's making sure that you, for me, not going down any one-way streets until I have to. I reserve decision space. I try not to make decisions now that are going to impact me in a year if I can wait to make those decisions for a few weeks or months until I have additional information. If we do need to go quick, we go quick. But sometimes people are apt to jump and make decisions, not realizing that they made a choice that's going to impact them months down the line. So we try to reserve decision space as much as we can tactically, and that includes, if it's a super tactically, management reserve, right? Making sure that you've got some sort of flexibility, that we think about how we cash flow requirements. I would give the example, I'm not sure I'm even talking about your question, frankly, I'm just rolling. I would give the example of, let's think about what happened at our southwest border over the course of 2019, right? Late 2018, late 2019, we have a surge of people. We can talk about, in fact, I'm happy to talk about anything that y'all would like to chat about at any point. A surge of people that looked different from what we had before. Instead of single adult males, we had families. We didn't have capacity, right? And we didn't have the capacity in other areas of the government to be able to take care of them. And so what happened is we had a massive crisis, and we had a lot of people in places that they basically an office space. What do? Well, we didn't budget for that. So from a resource management perspective, we got a cash flow. We got a cash flow. So we have to look at the resources that we have and say, look, we're going to bet on the come that we're going to be able to get some support for this because it is a crisis. And ultimately we did, right? It happened in the early summer that we got a supplemental appropriation. But in the intervening months from the shutdown that impacted us in December and January of 18 and 19 until we actually got a supplemental appropriation, until some additional international agreements were made, we ended up cash flowing that from where? Well, from pay. So had we not received a supplemental, we would have not been paying people come the last 3 pay periods of the fiscal year. That's the choice that we made. But that's what resource managers do, right? You don't always have the money in hand. You have to choose it based upon, you have to make wise choices along the way and then be able to have strategies to be able to refill the coffers or expand the pie. And that's what we did. And it's thankfully, and I'll thank Congress, I'll thank OMB, DHS, the taxpayer for providing supplemental appropriations to do that. But those are the kinds of things that we do to manage risk, to make sure we understand the strategic imperatives as well as the tactical methods by what we're filing.
Great, thank you. And on that same question, Jeff and Trey, maybe we can talk a little bit about, you guys commented on the different threat analyses that you do and the use of data. How do you communicate that and use that to enable the mission?
All right, so what you're telling me is I can't just, I love what he was doing, can I just do that
Please
too
feel
now?
free.
First couple of questions, I did that.
I know, I want to keep going. So the answer is, I mean, first and foremost, I preach this internally to my organization. A good portion of people, unfortunately, in law enforcement and intelligence organizations do not have strong business acumen, which is something that is a challenge for anybody who is in a CFO space. I joked about the fact that I have a accounting degree and that I didn't do a good job of hiding it. I kid, but the reality is, over the course of the past 15 years, our organization has promoted a lot of people that worked in the counterterrorism arena versus people that had worked in the white collar arena. What happens when that happens? Well, you have less people with substantial business acumen that are getting promoted within your organization, which means that communication of data becomes important in how do we make it simple for people to digest. So since I've taken over the role 2.5 months ago, my objective has been to, and I go back to my days as a forensic accountant because I did that, that forensic accountants are trying to explain something really complicated really simply for a jury. That's one of your critical roles as a forensic accountant. So I view my role as a CFO to be describing financial decisions as basically as I can to make sure that we have business acumen across the board, or the people are taking responsibility for the money that they're spending. So the answer is, if you have people that are in the counterterrorism world, they think everything they're doing is the most important. If you have people that are working in the counterintelligence world, they think everything they're doing is the most important. Criminal, they think everything they're doing is most important. Cyber, everything they're doing is most important. But the reality comes back to, we have a limited pot of resources, and we have to make sure that we're allocating that based on the threats. There are some violations that require more funding when it comes to equipment versus funding when it comes to personnel. So 60% of the FBI's budget is personnel based. The FBI has 38,000 employees. Of those 38,000 employees, approximately 13,000 of them are special agents. So if you actually start breaking each one of these things down, there's a lot of support that goes behind each one of the special agents that's involved. And a lot of that is going to be analysis. So Trey talks about actually applying the great analysis that we have towards our own business processes. That's something that we're currently working on in FFD at the FBI. So in my 2.5 months, so one of the things that I was thinking is, we have all these analysts all over the country that are doing great work. How can we take that operationalized intelligence and put it towards describing what we need and why we need it, and then making sure that we're using it to manage our assets. So again, one of the biggest successes that we have in the intelligence and law enforcement community is we're really good at collecting information. The challenge is we're really good at collecting the information, and then we need to take that data and we need to synthesize it down to decision-making ability. Again, not everybody has business acumen to make those decisions. My role as a CFO is to describe it in basic terms so that our least business acumen to senior executive can make good decisions.
I'll jump off a little bit more and just kind of riff, because I think that's critical to hit on a couple of key points. And my role is a little bit different in that at ODNI, at the intelligence community-wide level, we do not provide an annual financial statement for the intelligence community as a whole. I talked about it a little bit. We've got 17 different elements, and ODNI, being one of those elements, actually has its own chief financial executive that is separate and distinct from me for the agency and its operations. But if you take what these gentlemen have just described for what they're doing internal to their agencies or departments, bureaus, what we call them all, they all have their own unique personalities. But for myself, I'm leading a consortium of 17 different elements, each with their own CFO that are making those same sorts of trades across how much do we spend on overhead collection systems, how much do we spend on human resources within the CIA, how much do we spend upon human collection across CIA, FBI, and the other elements, DIA, that do those sorts of human collection. Where are we getting the best value out of those resource applications? And the goal, again, is to take that sort of across the board, because every agency thinks that their mission is most important, and when you start to take resources away from one agency to give to another, it doesn't matter what we think the priorities are. We've communicated those through our national security strategy, our national intelligence strategy, or guidance that we provide. When I try to take $200 million out of an agency across a 5-year plan to put towards something that we've all collectively agreed at the agency director level, to go towards something within another agency, my boss, being the director of national intelligence, gets a phone call from that agency director saying, "Why are you taking money from my agency? People are going to die as a result." And so the net effect of that is that you've got to have the right information, you've got to have the right data that substantiates why you're moving dollars and resources and people across different programs and capabilities. And that data right now, we are in our nascent stages of doing that. Different agencies are at different levels of maturity, but I can tell you what we're seeing in the private sector, we're just not adopting it quickly enough. So I look forward to working with Jeff and Sam on actually how do we enable that across the intelligence community. The big push that I've got right now is, and we're only in our second year of doing this, is being able to show the data to the CFOs of all the elements, what everybody is doing. Because collectively, I mean, CIA knows what they're doing, FBI knows what they're doing, NSA knows what they're doing, but they don't really have the sort of insight into what each other are doing. So what we're trying to do right now is open up the intelligence community budget transparently as much as we can within those constraints, and provide everybody the sort of insight and ability to see what everybody else is doing so that we can collectively make those decisions as a whole, and that the strategic role that the CFO has to each one of their agency directors has the ability to say, look, the DNI is making some decisions that do this, but this is why, this is what they're seeing. And if the data that we have are informing bad decisions because it's bad data, well, then there's an incentive to improve the data and improve the sort of quality of the decisions that we're making, and get all of those agencies on board with saying, all right, I get it. You're going to make decisions based upon the data you have, and if our data is not accurately representing that, then we need to take on the role of making our data better. And so right now, I view this as about a 3 or 4, maybe even 5-year plan, which is hopefully as long as I'm able to sustain this job. That up. I want to make it available, all this information available to them, so they can look at it and they can see why we're making decisions. And when we get to a forum that has the directors of all the agencies there, their CFOs have prepared them for adjusting their mindset to say CIA is not the most important player in the counterintelligence mission domestically. We need to move those resources into the FBI, or we need to move some FBI resources into human collection overseas because of these reasons, and here's what we're seeing as a threat, and being able to bring all CFOs who are strategic advisors to agencies and being able to apply those are able to inform their agency leadership, as well as the agency leadership can have an informed discussion around a table, as well as you can with 17 of them sitting in the room, as well as all their backbenchers, to make those sorts of strategic decisions that they need to make for the national security of the United States.
Great, thank you. So obviously, communication and relationships are key to enabling the mission and communicating the analysis that you all do to support that. Can you each talk a little bit about what relationships look like between the finance organizations and the mission operators at your levels, and then what your expectations are of the folks supporting you to build and maintain those relationships? Maybe we can start with you, Trey.
I was going to defer. I think mine's a little bit different because most of my constituencies are at the CFO level across the 17 different elements, and so they're representing those mission operations functions. But going back to my NRO days and having been an operator, a space operator, if you will, being at multiple ground stations, understanding how we use the systems and capabilities, I think is a critical experience that many people in the finance and strategic advisory role that the CFOs play need to have. I don't think you can be as effective in the job without having an operational tour or multiple operational tours. And I also think that the experience of taking our people and resource people to look at the things that we look at and putting them out in the field to inform the decisions or to get an operational perspective on what it really means when you do make a decision to adjust resources and what a program manager or an operator is actually having to do to adjust to that is real. It's not just a number on a spreadsheet. It's not just a number on a balance sheet. It's not just getting the numbers to match the zero when you get a top line at the end of the day. And so incorporating the ability to have a candid conversation with those operators, or in my case, the other CFOs, with it's much easier to say no in an email than it is to look somebody in the eye across the table or sitting next to you and tell them no, because you are building that bond and relationship with, all right, how can we both get to yes? And I think that's the critical thing that we have to find a way to do is, how can we both get to yes that says, based upon what we see in our understanding, based upon what you see in your understanding, let's make sure we're working off the same set of assumptions, because we're not usually doing that. We're usually looking at things through a different set of lenses and a different set of filters that give us a different outcome at the end of the day. If we can get to a common set of assumptions and a common set of data and agree upon that this is the information we have, what I've found more often than not is that we come to the same conclusion because we're agreeing upon the information and we're dealing with rational people. When we're dealing with people across an email chain or a group conversation and it's just words on a screen, you don't get that context. You don't get that appreciation of the impact directly to the people in the mission. And when you sit down and have that conversation, you have that relationship and understand the assumptions that we're all making and operating from, you get to a better understanding as a whole, and I believe a better agreement on what the best decision and objective we're trying to achieve is.
Jeff, please.
So partnership is critical to the success of everything that we do. In my role, I mean, the people that I'm typically working with are going to be internal partners versus external partners. My external partners are going to be Trey and then Lee Loftus and Jolene from DOJ. Those are the key external partners when it comes to our mission and getting our mission accomplished, because our budget comes from D&I money and from the appropriation that goes to DOJ. The FBI makes up a very large portion of DOJ's allocation. From an internal perspective, which is critical to me, it's about making the decisions and working with my partners that are senior executives in the organization to make sure that we're allocating the money to where we need to go. So it's funny because Trey gave that example. People die when you take our money. When I was in CID, anytime the violent crimes against children guy lost money, he would say children will die. And, you know, of course, he wins every time he says children will die. Reality comes somewhere. It's the for reals that something isn't getting done somewhere else. So we need to make sure that when we're doing that, we are really taking, again, across the board, all the information we have and prioritizing it based on what we can and cannot accomplish. So the lines that I'm using with folks now is, don't throw $20 million at a problem and then continue to throw 30 million more at it because you were allocated it for 50 million, even though you knew it was failing at 20 million. And that's something that I think we do all too often in the government, is we budget for something, we say we're gonna follow through on this technology, the technology is failing, it's failing, it's failing, it's failing, and we continue to throw more money at a failing project instead of saying, I'm willing to take the $15 million loss right now, instead of throwing another $25 million into it, or $35 million into it, and then looking at it going forward and saying, I can't believe what a horrible piece of technology our organization is operating with, right? Because I can tell you, as an FBI agent for the time I've been in, we have been technologically challenged over the course of my career. You would expect us to be, as we are one of the premier cyber threat organizations, to be pretty good with our own technology, and if I told you we were really good at our own technology, I wouldn't be telling you the truth. But we can be better by making sure that we're taking data and information as it comes in, analyzing that data, and cutting it off when we're done, right? And I think that's something that not just intelligence and law enforcement agencies can do. I'm pretty confident that all government agencies probably can do the same.
Great, thank you. Sam, how about you? On the subject
What's the
of
question?
relationships.
So I got operations. So for me, as an Air Force guy, let me say the first thing about when I would go to an installation, I'd get to know the ops group commander. So if you know the ops group commander and you know what their requirements are, and they're the ones who are flying the jets or flying satellites, whatever they are, then you're about 90% of the way there. And that was a lesson that a general officer in the Air Force taught me very early in my career. I think that's the same at CBP. So right when I took the helm short of 2 years ago, one of the things that I did very quickly was go talk to the chief of Border Patrol and ask her, Chief Provost, first off, tell her that I thought ops was most important and that we would find ways to get stuff done. I'd also go to the Air and Marine Executive Assistant Commissioner, who runs obviously the boats and the aircraft, as well as the Office of Field Operations, customs folks that you see at the airport. So going and talking to mission operators and making them understand, ensuring that they understand that you're there for them, for me, was first and foremost. And then understand what the mission is. So I'm an Air Force guy. I spent a couple years in consulting, and then I come to CBP as a consultant, and then in this role. I don't know CBP mission. I don't know CBP culture. I need to get to Memphis. I need to get to Detroit. I need to get to JFK. I need to understand what the women and men who serve in CBP have to face each and every day so that I can understand what we can do to help. That also suggests to the operators that I care about their mission. I kind of go where they are. That in and of itself is extraordinarily important when you're trying to develop the relationship with the operators. I'm not an operator. I've never been an operator. So I need to make sure that the operators view me as a trusted, as a trusted partner in what they do. We have this discussion a little bit in CBP about support organizations being customer service providers or being trusted partners. And I really tend toward the latter as opposed to the former, because I think that's extraordinarily important. So make sure the operators, for me, it's make sure the operators know that they're most important. That's why we exist in CBP. There's about 50,000 credential holding law enforcement officers in U.S. Customs and Border Protection. That's the mission. So that's number one. Understanding the mission. Me understanding the mission is important. Also, making sure that I deliver. You can be a really nice guy and a CFO that people like to have at the table, but if you're not able to deliver solutions, then why do they need you? Why should they ask you to be at the table? And in so doing, one of the things in terms of education of operators, because they're not 100% accurate all the time, is to make sure that they understand that the solution that they come up with may not be the lawful solution. But we have technical expertise to be able to find solutions. It may not get them exactly what they want, exactly when they need it, exactly from the contractor they prefer. But we can certainly get them a solution that will support the mission. I find the second part of the question was, what kind of people that you need, or that the folks in the organization, what we expect from them. I would say that's part of it, getting to understand the operators. The other thing is, and my current boss, Chief Huffman, will say, I'm the only one in the organization that can say no, right? So all along the way, there's this mid-level swirl that sometimes happens where it gets caught up in email battles or whatever it may be, and people are saying no or not understanding the larger picture. So if we go in understanding that the leader in the organization is the only one who can say no, everybody can say yes, as long as it's legal, right? But I think that also goes a long way in the organization becoming an organization that has a great deal of credibility with the operators at large. The final thing I would say about people is that we're looking at hiring, right? Because does the best accountant make the best financial manager? Maybe. Does someone with a liberal arts degree who can communicate make an okay financial manager? Can you teach them financial management business principles? Maybe. In this day and age when relationships matter, we're looking long and hard about whether the position descriptions that we hire folks into, I don't need guys who are 100% technical but can't communicate. I need folks who can do a little bit of everything so they can go into those operator communities, understand what the mission is, and communicate effectively and well represent the organization. If you can't do that, then you may not be exactly the rounded financial manager that we need in operations today.
Great, thank you. With that, we'll open it up to some commentary from the panelists, and then we'll do Q&A with the audience. I'll open it up to see who would like to start. If there's any final comments or general feedback you'd like to provide. Jeff?
Yeah, I was just gonna give a couple of things that came up along the way. I think one of the things that we talk about, I think it's important to talk about that in the world we live in, data is not black and white. It is absolutely subjective as well. So the FBI just underwent a process. We called it our field office staffing study. So the way that the FBI has staffed its 56 field offices was J. Edgar Hoover got off a train and we had a field office. And I'm serious. The New Haven field office was created because that was a train stop for J. Edgar Hoover between the New York division and the Boston division. And then we would staff these offices based on crises, right? So when you're talking about how you operate as an organization, now CBP has a much different mission than we do, and they end up with a legitimate crisis that's large enough that they have that supplemental appropriation. The FBI were dealing with a crisis, and CBP does this as well, every single day that we're planning for, right? And in the way that we're trying to operate is, when we're looking at our resources across the board, we take this field office staffing study and look at how are we putting our resources in each field office. So I give you this example, there were 2 field offices in Alabama. There's a Mobile field office and there's a Birmingham field office. Those 2 field offices are smaller combined than New Orleans, where I was the leader of, which is for Louisiana. It makes absolutely no logical sense. Why do we still have 2 field offices in some of these places? Talk about politics, right? Politics is local and national. It's hard to combine a field office when you have different congressional constituents in different places. That being said, we took it upon ourselves and looked at our staffing across the board. But what I want to explain to you is, while we came up with many data points that were objective data points, so be that, crime, murder rate per, 1,000, whatever those different data points were, there were also subjective data points, right? So you're talking about, Las Vegas is a symbolic city, right? New York City is a symbolic city. Washington, D.C. is a symbolic city. These are things that you can't put into an objective category, but are things that absolutely impact how we allocate our resources. So when you're looking at what we do for data, I think what's really complicated, because while we try to be very business-minded in what we do, there's also this other side to it where it's, I guess when you misinterpret in a business, you go bankrupt. If you misinterpret in our job, people die. And you got to be really careful to make sure that you're not making those mistakes so that people don't die, right? So, to maintain relevancy, you have to adapt. Shaft, and the line that we're using right now is, if you are a year behind in technology now, you're probably 10 years behind a year from now. It's not like 10 years ago where you were a year behind, you could be a year behind. And you gotta really be looking at things when you're planning your resources going forward to make sure that you are not falling 10 years behind in technology, because that's something I know all of our workforces are challenged with, which is hiring technically competent people, maintaining those technically competent people. As Sam said, you know, I need people that can communicate too. I'm in the FBI, I can't just have somebody that's technical that's going and involved in an investigation. I need somebody who actually has the bandwidth to talk to human beings when they're conducting these investigations. So just some thoughts.
Great, thank you. Sam?
So it's just, thanks again. I hope we get some good questions. That's the stuff we really all live for up here. But thanks again. This is an interesting time. It's a tough and rewarding time to be a CFO in this particular agency. What I would ask as we close is that folks be wide read. Make sure that you don't get sucked into the vortex of a particular theme or message. Because again, from an agency that should be an apolitical agency, right? It's become very politicized. And understanding, sort of assuming positive intent, working to read a broad range of things that you understand what really is going on in this nation is important. So again, it's a privilege to be here, a privilege to serve.
Thank you.
I just send you to the questions. So we've hit on the most important things. So I really enjoy engaging with the audience and kind of hearing what you all want to talk about or what questions you have that we haven't gotten to. So as much as we can.
Great, thank you, Trey. Okay, we'll open it up to the audience for any questions. Yes, John?
First of all, thank you all for your insights and comments. And a few themes popped up over the discussion around the need for better data-driven decision-making, hiring the right kind of people. Is there an effort going on in your respective agencies and departments around training your workforce to think differently and operate differently? What are you doing around that to make sure that they're more comfortable working with data and doing their work in that manner versus maybe some of the traditional methods that they came out of school doing and such?
I'll start just with the folks that we're dealing with. I think what I've looked at and what I've seen across the different agencies as we start to engage on this front is that they're starting it on their own already. This is a significant strategic shift in moving financial managers and resource managers that have traditionally always been in that support function versus, it depends upon the individual, but they do analysis regularly, but being able to incorporate things that are much broader, being able to put it in the context of how do we take risk, because I think that's the biggest challenge we focus on is in an area of flat is the new up, or 1% down is the new up. You're constantly adjusting because inflation continues to grow, even though it's small, continues to grow, and we're being asked to do more with less. And while that is a bit of a cliche, we have to identify where we have to do less specifically and what the risks that we're willing to take based upon what the data is telling us. And then you really get to, out of the objective realm, what is the subjective? And whether we like it or not, we live within a domain of political constituencies, whether it's the House, the Senate, the Republicans, the Democrats, intel oversight versus appropriations oversight, in many of my cases, armed services oversight, and as well as what OMB and the administration is telling us to do. And so you're balancing all of these constituencies and add 17 elements to that. It's really trying to make sure that we understand the information that we have and put it all into a context for whoever that decision maker is, and if it is the D&I in many cases, or if it's an agency director, that we're able to balance those risks and communicate them effectively to say, where are we going to take risk and why? And how do we communicate that to our organization? Why is this an acceptable risk to take versus going after something strategic that we need to invest in because China is eating our lunch, or we've got to make sure that our elections are secure from foreign influence, or that, as we look at who our future is, who are the intelligence community customers of the future? I think it's it's not just policymakers anymore. The American public and companies will be our future customers of intelligence. And how do we get that information to them? How do we engage with them? How do we create partnerships? Because they're on the front line economically. And if you're not paying attention, this administration's priority is the economic performance of the nation as a whole. And that is a foundational piece of our national security, is our economic security. And if we're losing intellectual property, if we're losing the influence battle because Russia has bots in the millions operating and influencing our elections, or just social discord, that's something that we've got to find a way to inform the public about, and so that they know that they're watching a deep fake video and they're not watching the president actually say something, or a member of Congress saying something that's not exactly what they're saying. So how do we look at how our constituencies as an intelligence community are changing versus what they've used to been, which is a very closed policymaker, covert set of information that can only be held within a SCIF and communicated. We've got to find a way to open that up and share it, not just internally and to our partners, but also with our coalition and allied partners across the world.
Great, thank you, Chair.
Use your day for things.
Anyone else like to comment on that? Jeff? On that topic, I'd like to ask, do you see any resistance in your organizations to using data? And if you do, how do you overcome that? And are there barriers to using data?
I'm happy to. I think organizationally, and this is, I can summarize this pretty quickly. We have an entire intelligence division in the FBI, meaning that data has been prioritized since 9/11. That has been ingrained into the DNA of our people and is happening on a daily basis. And the line that I use as a senior operations leader, if we're talking about integrating intelligence and operations in 2019, we're failing. That shouldn't be a conversation anymore. That should be the norm. The other part of the FBI that we have is we have our resource planning office, which has become very mature. Our resource planning office is about data, and that reports directly to our associate deputy director, meaning the organization is prioritizing resource planning and the idea of intelligence and information. We have an executive assistant director in charge of our intelligence processes. Everything that we do in the FBI needs to include analysis of data. It has to include data, it has to include information, because again, when you're looking to prevent, even a mass act of violence, data and looking at that data and making sure that we have a real clear picture of how we're looking at it and absorbing it and then actioning it is critically important. So our organization is based on the collection of data, the analysis of data, and then also actioning on that, which is what Trey was saying, is it's not just good enough that we inform people, we actually have to do something about it. And then one comment on what Trey said, we are including private sector partners in our joint terrorism task forces. We're including them now. We've started counterintelligence task forces. And then finally, cyber. The only way that this country is going to be able to combat the cyber threat is to be working hand in hand with our corporate partners. They have to be equal partners with us, meaning we have to be transparent with all the information we're collecting, which is what Trey is asking us to, as the people that are getting this information, do. That's our job, because the old model of the FBI is, thank you for telling us that, right? The new model is, here's all the information we have. These are the threats right now. What are you seeing? And that's a change in mindset.
Great, thank you.
Imagine 1 million pieces of mail coming into the facility at JFK, and they're potentially being fentanyl, with very small levels of fentanyl that can kill a great number of our citizens. And having to sort through that mail and figure out what mail is good mail and what mail is actually bad mail and has that fentanyl in it. Imagine parcels coming in that have had a lot of intellectual property right infringed stuff like Adidas sweatshirts or shoes or Rolex watches or some of the watches these guys are wearing. The stuff, so data is absolutely essential. Where did those parcels come from? What previous parcels that we interdicted, what kind of tape were they wrapped with, right? This is the sort of data that can be turned into information and actually create positive outcomes. So to the question of the importance, I think it's partly the importance of data and resistance to it. I would say it's recognized as being essential. The integration of it is recognized as being essential across law enforcement. And then it's a matter of getting systems to be able to harness the information and be able to make near real-time decisions. The other thing about it in a law enforcement organization is there's also a lot of hard-won experience. And I would suggest, not being a law enforcement officer myself, but a 35-year law enforcement professional can see, right? Somehow because of their experience, they can be blinded by it too, but through their experience, they can see certain things and they can recognize patterns somehow that an inexperienced law enforcement officer cannot. And I've seen it when, I think it was Memphis, where our customs officers are able to see the shipments coming in, and one of the airlines, one of the shippers provides that data, and a novice can't recognize the patterns, but an experienced law enforcement individual can. So there's a role of experience, and can you take that experience and actually teach it, or somehow deliver it via a system? Those are the sorts of questions that we have to continually ask ourselves, because the threat is real. The threat continues to grow. So the bad guys, I wish the bad guys would use their powers for good instead of evil. We'd be in a lot better world. But the reality is that's the way it's going to be. And with the high risk that comes with things like fentanyl, it's really important for us to be sure that we are leveraging every bit of data that we can.
Great, thank you. Any other questions? Yes, William.
First of all, thank you very much. This is a tremendous discussion. We talk a lot about data. Can you maybe go through some of the steps or processes that you take to ensure that you're managing the risk of making decisions off of bad data? Because it seems like what's the credibility of the data that you are all analyzing? Some of it's good, some of it's bad. Can you explain some of the steps you take?
Great question, thank you.
I'll give you my perspective at a macro level for what we're dealing with right now. When I did budget rollout last year, we took a bit of a different perspective when we were putting together our intelligence community budget and showing Congress where we'd made shifts in terms of where we were in counterterrorism in prior years and mission and country focused. One of our challenges is that consistency of reporting of that information, and it's that when we take a mission, what we call a mission of interest data call. Every year, the intelligence agencies provide 100% of their budget. They apply it to missions of interest, and that's CT, counterterrorism, counterintelligence, counterproliferation. We've got, I can't remember, 14, 15, 16 of these missions that they're specifically focused on. But they apply 100% of their resources against those missions of interest. On the contrary, for what we call our country of interest data, how we break our budget down into separate elements. When we get to a pretty small element, which we call a sub-project, that if less than 50% of the resources in that are not going towards a specific country of interest, China, Russia, North Korea, Iran, they don't apply those, they don't account for those dollars to any specific country. It's not allocated. So when you look and compare how many resources that we say we're spending on counterterrorism versus how much we say we're spending on China or Russia per se, without giving specific numbers, it was almost an order of magnitude greater what we're spending on counterterrorism versus Russia. But you're counting all of those additional resources that go towards your facilities leasing. So the facility leasing at ODNI headquarters at Liberty Crossing is accounted towards some sort of mission of interest. Well, that's not really going to, maybe with NCTC and a couple of mission centers, it is applied there. For election security, as an example as well, when when we do a data call, we're actually providing a very significant sort of manual burden to the agencies or elements to be able to say, how much are you spending on foreign influence and election security? And when we break it down with how we do, asking FBI or CIA or anybody to say, how many of your actual FTE are you spending on election security across all of their field offices or sites overseas, you're just going to get a good Kentucky windage of it. And so what we're trying to look at really overall is, can we find those trends in that data given the quality of that data right now? But when we look at what we really have access to, I talked about being an accountant, my bio, background, and education history is all within an information system within ODNI's repository. How I spend my day in my computer logging, I consent to that monitoring every day when I go in. What I read, what I pull up, what I look at is all monitored and available for us to do a look at. Why can't we just go down that path? Now, and sort of pulling all that information in and saying, all right, Trey is a business manager, a program manager, an Air Force operator, done space. The resistance to doing that is more so about small p political and ownership of that information than it is anything else. And having the ability to do that is less of a technical challenge than it is more of a cultural shift. When we talk about what we're trying to do here with this, it's so much more of a cultural shift, and the people that we're trying to hire just to think of that mindset. When I was hired back into ODNI in the job, or when I was hired in ODNI in April of 2010 in the job, I've got about 10 or 12 people still in similar positions that they were when I was hired there, and I've gone and done 5 different jobs between now and then before I came back as the CFO. And so we've got to get that cultural shift to occur, and it just doesn't happen overnight. So getting the people comfortable with that is easy in general once they see the power of it, and that's really the challenge, is demonstrating to them the power and utility of being able to leverage the data that is available to them versus doing what they've been doing for 10 years in the way that they've been doing it because it's comfortable. And sometimes that just requires moving people into new opportunities and bringing somebody new in with a fresh perspective on looking at information and data in a way that we've never done.
Great. Jeff, Sam, any comments on how you manage the risk around bad data?
I mean, I was going to say, just from a macro level, I'm not that concerned about bad data on a financial decision for the FBI, right? Because I'm more concerned with bad data on a investigative decision than I would be on a financial decision. We're making macro decisions based on a process, right? And then, of course, as Sam put it, the gut feeling, blink, for those of you that have ever read Malcolm Gladwell, right, is I've been an FBI agent for 22 years. I can probably tell you that if I can't find the problem in Chicago, I probably don't need to work the problem in Chicago, right? Because that means I'm spending a lot of effort, unless it's a WMD device that's going to blow up the city. If it's a crime that somebody's committing and it's not kicking me in the head, I probably don't need to work it, right? And I think that's kind of, from the macro level decision making for us, I'm not real worried about bad data because it's not going to put us out of business. I would be concerned, and and Trey talked about this, the financial statements. The FBI having a qualified opinion would be pretty offensive to me, right? We're the FBI. We are the fidelity, bravery, integrity. So the processes that we have in place, if there's a financial misstatement that we would have, would be a critically problematic thing, because the FBI's job is to earn the public's trust every single day. So having a qualified opinion based on a financial misstatement would certainly impact our trust. But from a financial perspective, I'm not real worried about macro data being not great. I am worried about it on the basis of a decision, because when we're conducting investigations, our job is to investigate and get the facts. It's not to convict anybody, it's just to get the facts. And if the information that we have is wrong, that's a huge problem.
Yeah, I'm glad that DHS had her seventh consecutive clean audit opinion with some material weaknesses. And thanks to the team, your guidehouse team for helping us with internal controls and the things. I would say from for CBP, I think there's a lot of great work that gets done with data at National Targeting Center, National Vetting Center, for example. What I find is that oftentimes we're not ready to make decisions until the data is really clear. So, sometimes that means you're too late. So the real question is, as you try to accelerate the decision making, you take additional risk. If you act on the very first decision point, it's high risk. If you get a lot of points, it's like a pointillistic painting, right? You get a picture, draws a picture for you. So the question is, and how do we get out of? We have stovepipes of excellence, right? Many organizations do. We've got the Border Patrol, we've got the Office of Field Operations, and they have their own data gatherers. How do we integrate this data? How do we get a common picture so that we can all look at it as early as possible and be able to make wise decisions? Like I said, it seems to me a lot of the big decisions happen after the data is just so fracking obvious that there's no other decision to be made. Are there 19,000 people in custody on the southwest border at a certain point in time? Yeah, okay, that's a problem. It would have been nice to know that was coming 6 months prior to that. Were there data points that we missed in terms of what was going on in Mexico or the Northern Triangle? Those are the sort of things that I'm interested in, and how do you get ahead of those sorts of challenges?
Great, thank you. We have time for another question or two. Yes, please.
Hi, my name is Carla Flink. I'm an assistant professor here at American in School of Public Affairs. I spend my days thinking about public budgeting, spending, and processes, so this is a bigger picture question. But I'm really interested in how you set your budgets and how you adapt them to the mission, given we have a federal government that runs off continuing resolutions.
It's enormously problematic. So let me start with DHS. I'll take you through the last, fiscal 19. We came into fiscal 19 under continuing resolution. We're in 20 now under continuing resolution, which will go until December 20th, and we'll see what happens after that. It always seems to line up with the holidays, right? Every time. Operation Deny Christmas is certainly so. But in 19, we had 4 continuing resolutions in the Department of Homeland Security. We had a shutdown for 35 days. The normal process, the normal process should be the President's budget is submitted in February of the year, and then by October 1st, that has gone through the House and Senate Appropriations Committees. President signed, you got a bill, you're ready to go. It never happens anymore. I mean, it happened for DOD, I think, in the past year or two, but it's a real challenge, because what ends up happening is there's complicating forces. Not only are you dealing with the year of execution, which is your continuing resolution authority is typically based upon your prior executions, so the decisions that you were made that you were planning in the current fiscal year sort of get put on hold, military construction, for example, or other things. So you're now working off this daily rate. At the same time, you're working budgeting for the next year, right? So we're now executing fiscal 20 in this case. We're budgeting for 21, waiting to get passed back from OMB, which is OMB's decisions about the 21 budget. At the same time, you're working conference planning for the House and Senate appropriators, because they're looking at December 20th and going, hey, we might be able to get a bill, maybe if things work out. Otherwise, we're going to have maybe another continuing resolution, maybe a full year CRMS. But it is enormously challenging for financial professionals to be able to do our work under the current scenario. So it is inefficient. It is we will do what's called technical assistance, which is when you go and talk to the House and Senate appropriators and say, hey, this is what we said in February. It's now February of the next year. Let me tell you what's changed, because things change. So we will do technical assistance multiple times, which are major exercises. So right now we're engaged in technical assistance for 20. If the process worked the way the process is intended to work, that all would have been done. We'd be executing 20 and working on 21 now. But it is inefficient, maddening, and I hope we'll get to a point where we get back to regular order.
Thank you.
I'll add just like a years, meaning inflationary adjustments never occurred unless they got some sort of supplemental that, enacted. But they've been operating under this level that continues to go down because of inflation and buying power has decreased. Additional to that is because you don't know what you're really going to be operating at, you're a little bit conservative in the first part of the year. When you're not getting an appropriation until 3 or 6 months into the fiscal year, you've got a lot of additional dollars that are sitting there that you've been holding on to once enacted and not spending because you were waiting to make those investments. You didn't know if you were going to get that appropriation enacted. And as a result, now you've got 6 months to spend the balance of that because then it takes another month just to get your apportionment from O&B and your full budget authority available. That's a good timeline. The net result is you've spent significantly lower, and now you've only got, in many cases, the rest of that year to spend that budget authority. So either you're doing it inefficiently, or you're not going to spend it all. And 1 year tenure of appropriations, my year at O&B taught me, and we had a whole set of conversations, is the single worst efficiency incentive that the federal government can have. Because of that late enactment, because of continuing resolutions, you have limited time to spend the dollars, and so you come down to the end of the fiscal year, and you're spending them as well as you can, but certainly sometimes not the best way that they could be overall if you were thinking much longer term. I liken it to bungee jumping without knowing how long your cord is or how high your bridge is. So you're going to be conservative on the front end because you don't want to hit that river of those rocks or that concrete at the bottom of that bridge when you jump off. So as a result, you're going to end up well short just because, hey, you want to have a good time bungee jumping, but you don't want to risk everything by jumping off too soon.
Great, thank you so much.
Can we get one more? Was there
One more question? Yes, Brian.
Well, Trey, Jeff, Sam, thank you all for being here. I really do appreciate it. So my question today is really around the financial statement auditors. Of course, over the years, they're starting to get smarter and smarter. Just as much as we're talking about bridging finance and operations, they are also doing some of that as well. So my question to each of you is, between all these experiences that you have, how do you balance being open and transparent with also setting boundaries?
Open and transparent, I guess the question, open and transparent to who?
To the financial statement auditors.
All right, so anybody who's coming into the FBI is going to have to be cleared for the information that they're getting. I mean, the answer is that we are completely transparent with our auditors when they're coming in. So the people that are working in FBI space, I mean, I will tell you, we had some interesting interactions during this audit because there's the fraud questions that people ask. When you ask a fraud question in the FBI, you get people pretty upset. And it's not that we're trying to lack transparency, but reality comes down to when you ask that question, everybody who's conducted a criminal investigation in their lives thinks that you're accusing them of, conducting fraud. That being said, I mean, our budgets our systems are transparent. They're easy for people to come in and look at. There's no, I mean, I don't see any challenge when our auditors are coming in with them being transparent and using data analytics, I guess if that's your question, on some of our systems. I don't see any issue with our auditors. And again, I came in year end, I just signed the financial statement, so I haven't done that in my entire life, so then I just signed my life away with Director Ray, but I'm pretty confident in our financial statements.
Brian, honestly, I love the auditors, right? I think throughout my career, throughout my career, one of the things I've learned is get the auditors as close as possible, and not in an inappropriate relationship kind of way. They have to be independent, but at the same time, I just find that as a CFO, being accessible anytime they want to talk is very useful. Ensuring that the people in my charge understand the value and importance of the auditors and what they do. Trying to work, we talked about the operators, trying to make sure that the operators understand the value of what the auditors bring and what the financial statement audit is and how they need to be involved. This is an ongoing process for us at CBP. But I think that relationship actually benefits us. And we were talking, as this financial audit was going on over the course of the year, there's going to be frustrations, right, at times, and the stuff that they ask for and when they ask for it and all that kind of stuff. But they find stuff, and there would sometimes be this, well, you didn't look at that last year. Well, you're moving the goalposts. Well, no, they're moving us further down the field. You go from being at your own 20 to now you're at the opponent's 20, if you will. I find that the auditors, it's like working out. You just got to keep working out. You got to keep lifting. You got to have an organization, continue to grind through it. And the auditors are going to change things a little bit, and they're going to go a little bit deeper, and they're going to ask tougher questions. But I think through openness and communication, that always is a good thing, and ultimately you get better results for the organization, you get better results for the American taxpayer, for all of us. And I have no issues with openness and transparency, and the auditors have a role and responsibility to play. They have to be mature about the way they handle it as well, but I haven't had any issues at all.
Great. With that, we'll conclude our panel. Thank you so much. That was fantastic. And we appreciate all of your time. Thank you to all.
I want to close out real quick with, again, on behalf of my dean, Vicki Wilkins, who couldn't be with us this morning, a huge thank you to our panelists and to all of you for coming up to Tenleytown this morning. It warms our heart at the School of Public Affairs to have everyone having this kind of conversation here in our space. So one shameless plug again before I let you go. Mission is Possible podcast that dropped last week, maybe of interest to this group. It's Jeremiah Alvarez's panel from earlier. He's here with us today about using data to make decisions, particularly in the IT space, financial space, across the board. So maybe of interest, that just dropped. And one forthcoming in another week or so has to do with the use of behavioral analysis for disaster preparedness. So that'll drop this month as well. And we're also getting ready to launch our calendar speaker series for 2020. So that will be coming your way soon. And we hope to see you at future sessions. And again, thanks so much for joining us. And thank you, panel. Amazing.